All right, we're going to take a look at what determines how much resistance a chunk of material has when you, say, hook it up to a battery and try to run current through it. So one thing that you might think of is one thing that could matter as far as restricting the flow of current through this material is how long the material is, right? So you might imagine as you make this thing longer that it's going to be more of a struggle for the charge to work its way through, or in other words, I guess for the electrons to go this way. Um, and the other thing is how thick it is. So you can kind of think of the material like a pipe, and the fatter the pipe is, the easier it is for the current to flow through the pipe. So the length, making it longer, should make it tougher, and making a fatter pipe should actually make it easier for the material to carry current. And then finally, the third thing is actually what the stuff is made out of. If this thing is like a block of wood or something, wood dowel that you're trying to run current through versus a copper dowel, that's going to make a huge difference. And so the way you capture that is with a quantity that's called resistivity. This is a Greek letter rho. Looks kind of like a stylish P, but it's a lowercase Greek rho. And this is what's called resistivity, and it kind of works like it sounds, where the bigger this value is, the more resistance the material has. So altogether, it depends on those three things, and it works like this. The resistance, well, goes up if the material is more resistive. It goes up if it's longer. And then it turns out if the area gets bigger, then that makes the resistance go down. And so that's why that's in the denominator. So there's the resistance of how you could find the resistance of say, like a pipe-shaped or prism-shaped chunk. So let's take a look at how this plays out. So here's that relationship for finding the resistance using resistivity, length, and area. One thing to think about are just the units of this thing, even if you haven't met it before. Resistance is measured in ohms, so this thing must kind of have ohms in it. But then you have meters divided by meters squared, which would give you like 1 over meters, the combination of these two. And so besides having ohms, we'd have to multiply by another factor of meters to cancel the meters, the 1 over meter that develops here. So that means that this thing will have units of ohms times meters, right? And so if we take a look at a couple examples of materials, so silver and copper are known to be great conductors, and so you notice they have very low resistivity. So they're terrible resistors if you want. They have a really low resistivity. They're fantastic conductors, so that's why that number's so low. And if you look at some other materials like silicon and glass and quartz, well, you notice glass and quartz and so on have enormous resistivities. They're great resistors. They're terrible conductors. And so you can see rubber being another material that you would tend to use as an insulator. It has a very high resistivity. Well, so just to look at a quick example, this says find the resistance of a 1 mile long copper wire with a diameter of 1 millimeter. Well, so all you would do is use this relationship up above. So it's copper, so you'd look for the resistivity of copper, 1.68 times 10 to minus 8. And then it looks like we have effectively the length and the area. So you'd say the resistance is the resistivity, rho, this is rho, times the length, 1,600 meters. And then you notice I divided by pi r squared by the area. So it turns out skinny wire like that that's a mile long, it would have a 34.2 ohm resistance. So copper is a pretty good conductor. That's a lot of copper, and only 34 ohms if it's that long. So next thing that we'll kind of take a look at is if you are running current through this through a material, is how fast the charge actually goes. Now I know we know that it's actually electrons going, say, from right to left here through the material, but conventional current is thought of as the flow of positive charge, so I'm going to kind of present it or think about it that way. And so what you can do to kind of figure out how fast things go, I'm really just going to present this and kind of looking at how this comes about from just looking at the units. If you've done any fluid mechanics, you know that a velocity times an area gives you a volume per time. And then if you basically just multiply by charge per volume, then that gives you the charge per time, which is the current. So V times A is volume per time. And then if we just have a way of getting the charge per volume, so then multiplying those two things together would give you the charge per time, which is the current. So just to follow this through, if you know for the material how many carriers there are per volume. And that's something that either you're trying to calculate or you would be given for a particular material. For instance, for copper, there might be like 1 electron for every atom, so that'll give you a certain number of charge carriers per volume. This quantity is just the charge on the charge carrier that's measured in coulombs, and then velocity, meters per second. We're actually kind of trying to figure out what's called the drift velocity here, and then times this cross-sectional area of this pipe. And so you can see if you look at the units, velocity times area is going to give you like volume per time, but then here we're dividing by volume. So we kind of have per time, and then this is charge. So charge per time is the current. So this will give you basically coulombs per second, which is amperes or current. So as by way of example, let's just figure out that 1 mile long chunk of copper, if we crank it up, so we're running 10 amps of current through it, let's say, which is a lot of current. But let's see how fast the electrons are going in that wire. And something that we're being given here is that copper's got this many electrons per cubic meter. And what this is roughly speaking, it's like 1 free electron per atom. And if you figure out how many atoms are in a cubic meter, you'll get something like that. So we're just going to use this relationship. So we put in 10 amps for the current, and so that's why there's a 10 there. This is this number of charge carriers per volume. So that's number per meter cubed, how many charge carriers there are. This would be the charge on a single charge carrier. We happen to know they're electrons. I didn't put negative because we're just finding the magnitude of the velocity. And then this is that cross-sectional area of the thing. And surprising when you solve for it, even though this is quite a bit of current, 10 amps of current, you get these tiny speeds. Those electrons are only drifting through the material. I'm showing positive charges going to the right, but it would actually be electrons going to the left. They would only be drifting this way at 0.94 millimeters per second. So how can it be that that's so slow when the current is so high? That's a lot of charge. There's 10 coulombs going by every second. It's just because there's so many electrons. They don't have to move very fast for a great many of them to pass by as time goes by. So the thing to know about drift velocities is they end up often being kind of shockingly small when you figure out what they are, how big they are. Final little thing we'll look at, it's interesting to look at charge carriers in here. We do happen to know that with a chunk of copper that the things that are on the move are actually electrons going from, say, this right-hand side to the left. But it's not always the case that the effective charge carrier has a negative sign, and there's actually a way to tell. And so what we're going to do is hook up a chunk of material to a battery, and I guess the way that I've got this set up now, it looks like this is the positive end. So in principle, positive charges would go this way if positive charges were moving, and now negative would go this way. What we're going to do, so it says suppose we didn't know if the charges that moved were positive things going this way or negative things going the other. Turns out a way to tell the difference is you put a magnetic field, say, into the page through this thing. So we'll have these X's come up representing a magnetic field going into the page there. If electrons are the charge carriers, an electron going this way through a field that points in, what you can find out if you think about which way the magnetic force acts is these electrons will get pushed toward the bottom of the metal bar, or of the bar here, or whatever this material is. And so the bottom of this thing would build up with, say, negative charge and leaving this side positive. So there'd be this voltage difference. Not only the voltage difference motivating charges to move, but also a voltage difference perpendicular to that. And so what you would see if the charge carriers were negative is this side of the thing would build up negative. And that's what you see like with something like copper. But if the charge carriers were positives going this way instead, positive charge going this way, again, if you do kind of like a right-hand rule, figure out which way the Lorentz force or the magnetic force on this positive charge is, that would make positive charges collect at the bottom. And so you would actually see a difference by just measuring which side of this block is at high voltage, and you can distinguish between whether whether it was the case that negative charges were moving left to right or positive charges moving right to left. So you can actually tell that. And this extra voltage difference that builds up across this thing is what's called the Hall effect. So if in a block of copper, this side would develop negative charge. In certain semiconductors, it actually behaves like it's positive charges on the move. And what will happen is this side will actually develop positive instead of negative. So what I'm showing here in the schematic is what you would see for something like copper. So again, the voltage between the top and bottom surfaces actually depends on how strong this field is, and the sign depends on what the charge carriers are. So this device here you can actually use to measure whether there's even a field here or not. You can just run current through a block of material, and if a voltage develops between the top and the bottom, that means you've got a field there. So that's a field sensor called a Hall probe. So two uses for this Hall effect. You can use it as a magnetic field sensor. That's a Hall probe. If you get this voltage difference, it means there must be like a magnetic field there that you can measure. And then the second thing is you can tell if the charge carriers are positive or negative, whether you have electrons on the move, or whether what they call in semiconductors holes on the move, or which act kind of like positive charges.